Now, you're a modest guy, but I want you to talk about a couple of projects you've done recently, because here I am flying out here, and what do I see in the American Way magazine but an article about a record you did with Neko Case, and a month before I saw another article about a record you did with KC Tunstall.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about working with both those artists, and tell us a little bit about how you might have used perhaps some ribbon microphones.
Well, coincidentally enough, thanks to your support, we ended up with a pair of VR2s, which is the SE Electronics active ribbon mic, and we love those mics. It's crazy. Katie Tunstall's vocals and guitar on that entire recording that we did in Tucson, some was done at Toy Box in Bristol, England with John Parrish, but the stuff that was done at Wave Lab, which is about 80% of the record, was the VR2 on her voice and another VR2 on her guitar, and using the figure eights and the nulls to sort of create isolation. The first time we did it, it was a demo, quote unquote, and Chris didn't really have the mic maybe in the ideal place. We had ended up using those tracks, of course. So those mixes were a little tougher.
That always happens.
Of course. Those mixes were a little tougher because there was a little bit more bleed. But when she came back the second time to do it officially, since Chris had already worked with her, he understood where to place the vocal mic. The problem was he didn't know her dynamic yet. When I opened up the tracks for on mixing the second sessions, I was astonished that there was so little bleed between the two. Because got to mind you, on that record, there's no overdubs. Everything on that record is performance. It's a band playing in the room with her.
You're kind of working without a net there, aren't you?
Well, that's what we do. So the demo stuff, she was in the room with the drums. She's in the room.
Wow.
So I had drums and bass and whatever on those mics. But I was able to make it go. Well, then Chris said, I think this time I'll put her in our only little booth, our little isolation area. I don't have a control room. It's a big open room. So we put her in the booth, and then the isolation, of course, was without the drum stuff on there. It was a lot easier for me. But just the vocal and guitar, you solo them, you're like, oh, she did those separately. No.
Because isn't that the classic problem? You get a lot of vocal on the acoustic guitar mic?
If you don't know what you're doing, yeah. But you know what? I teach that it really is about the mics and the polar pattern and the positioning. So you have to work with an artist, who gets it, because, obviously she's got to lock herself into that spot, because it's very, the slightest little movement one way or the other, and things can get a little south. I find the VR2s are a little more forgiving. In fact, so much that I just did a record in Sweden this summer that I insisted on taking them. And, instead of taking them, you actually were able to get me a pair over there, which saved me some weight and able to throw a few other things in the bag. And I was stumped to get an acoustic guitar sound without drum bleed in this particular place we were working until the VR2 showed up.
What's the name of that project?
It's Christian Schellvander. He's a Swedish solo artist. He was in a band called the Loose Goats. And he's a well-known indie rock artist over there. He bought a home studio, quote unquote, which is really a beautiful old church, big ambient room. It sounded fantastic for drums. But again, we had this challenge that we wanted to track live. We could not isolate him away from the drums enough that there wasn't this horrible, washy, weird bleed, because it was a big room. So that ambience of the room was just getting on everything. So we gave up on vocals. We knew that wasn't going to happen. We're like, well, we'll just use a 58. We'll cut vocals later. He's like, but I really, really want to get my acoustic guitar at the same time. And I said, dude, I need this mic. And so we waited until we got the mic. And we got the mic. It was like, boom. That day, I built a little gobo box, put the VR2 inside. He stood in front of it, kind of pressed into the gobo box. There was no weird drum bleed. Gone. No more. Done. Wow. So it's the rejection. It's I don't know what it does. All I know is it works. It sounds freaking great.
And then you also told me a story about using it, I think, on some of the string sections.
That was fun. I went to Gothenburg, and I took it there. And I had to do 8-piece. I had to do a quartet with a double bass, trumpet, trombone, and clarinet, all live in the same room, conductor, the whole 9 yards. And mind you, interestingly enough, I haven't actually engineered a record from start to finish in 8 years.
Wow.
So I have a very good engineer, and I'm now this kind of mixed guru, whatever.
And you're also entering the production phase as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I do a lot of production. So I've gotten to this thing like, oh, I teach, I'm too burnt out, I don't make records anymore, whatever. It was fun. It was challenging. I hadn't done it in a long time. I was like, oh yeah, you got to sweat, you got to run around, you got to hook up cables. So I'm rushing around, string section coming in, a lot of money. I got to get it ready. Took the VR2, and I knew I wanted to use that on the woodwinds, and so I set it up. I actually had an R&R1 and the VR2. So the R&R1 I had already been using in Sweden for some guitar tracks. I took that with me. I put that on the trumpet and the VR2 on the clarinet, and they were sitting next to each other, as close as you and I. So yeah, clarinet and a trumpet. That should be.
There's a little volume difference there, isn't there?
Little volume difference. VR1 on the trumpet. RNR1 on the trumpet. VR2 on the clarinet. Clarinet player gave me a little lip at first. He didn't think I had the mic positioned properly because he didn't know what it was, and I put it up like this, and of course it's not a giant, old school condenser. The studio was full of 47s and 49s and 251s and every imaginable.
Sounds like a pretty nice place you're working.
Millions of dollars worth of equipment, and I'm setting up my funny little ribbons. And of course the string guys are all like, what is this? We've never seen this. Wow, it's the big mics. So he kind of gave me attitude like that I didn't have it mic'd properly. And I go, well, what's up? And he goes, well, I'm going to play bass clarinet too. I'm like, well, that's cool. I'm like, but the sound really comes out of the tube. And he says, yes, but on this, and he points to the bell, it comes out of here. And I said, yeah, there's one note that comes out of there. And he's like, well, this is true. And I said, and is that note in the song? And he goes, well, no.
Oh, you're making it too hard on him.
He wanted me to put 2 mics up just because. And I'm not going to. So I left the VR.
Who's producing the session again now?
Me. I was producer. So I'm like, dude, we'll just record and we'll see. I left the VR2 where it was. He went ahead and tracked a couple songs, switched between clarinet and bass clarinet in the same arrangement. He has to switch.
Wow, not an easy task for you.
No, so he's switching between the two. After about the first couple hours of tracking, we had 2 days to do like 10 songs. We were doing 5 a day. We're really pushing. We took a coffee break. They all come into the room. I wouldn't let them hear anything, just their headphone mixes, which are Q mixes, so what do they know, right? It's what they want to hear. So now they're walking in, they're listening to what I'm putting up to see if I'm happy. The trumpet player stops, and he goes, what mic is that? And I go, well, that's the Rupert Neve designed RNR1 ribbon mic. He's like, I can't believe how good my trumpet sounds. The clarinet player goes, what? Wait a minute. Every one of them, I started soloing him, and you could just see all of them going like, we've never experienced this before. There was no bleed between the trumpet and the clarinet, none. 0. Now, mind you, it was more symphonic. It wasn't like mariachi like I do, where he's going to be, it was very, very controlled, very symphonic.
Still had to be a 20 dB level difference between those two.
It's still a trumpet. But you know what? It's all about, getting those planes set up, like the RNR1's face and the VR2's face are here, right? So I'm not going to have any phase problems because I'm not doing any of this stuff. So it's really about like figuring out. So if I got to put the RNR1 further back on the trumpet, then I got to match that VR2, and I'm getting those, the null patterns and a little bit of angles, and just using the figure 8 and really taking advantage of the pickup.
We're getting a little lesson from a master here.
So it's really about understanding. Look, this thing, a ribbon mic is going to reject like nobody's frickin' business on those null sides. Use it. It's amazing. It's like my students' minds are blown when I show them that. They're like, I don't understand. How did that happen?